Good morning. Welcome to today's Family Matters show. Today we are talking about protecting your family. Specifically, we will be focusing on guardians. Guardians take care of another when needed. For example, a guardian will care for a minor child in the absence of parents, or a guardian may be appointed for an older person who needs help handling their affairs because they lack capacity. So stay tuned to discover insights on selecting guardians and avoiding the need to go to court. I'm Jeff Rehmeyer. I'm an attorney and president of the CGA law firm. Historically, my practice involved estate planning and administration, business, and real estate. Now, I'm emphasizing my focus on estate planning to include planning for young adults. On today's show, I have a very special guest, Bryan Tate, Register of Wills and Clerk of the Orphans Court. Welcome, Bryan.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning.
Good morning. So before we get going, I want to give you a little background on Bryan. Bryan does currently serve as Register of Wills and Clerk of the Orphans Court. He was sworn in on January 3rd, 2020. Prior to becoming Clerk of the Orphans Court and Register of Wills, Bryan served for 14 years as Vice President at the York County Community Foundation, having led both its grant-making and fundraising departments. Bryan is a native of York County, graduate of Spring Grove and Temple University. Bryan also served 12 years as Chief of Staff to former Congressman Todd Platts, who represented York County in South Central Pennsylvania in the House of Representatives. Bryan also has many volunteer roles. He is a past president and multiple Paul Harris Fellow of the Rotary Club of York, president of the board of the Miss Pennsylvania Scholarship Foundation, founder of the Spring Grove Alumni Course, board member of the Cultural Alliance, and much more. Bryan is also the past chairman of the York County Estate Planning Council, program chair of Legal Legacy of York County, and serves on the legislative committee of the Register of Wills and Clerk of Orphans Court. Bryan, you packed a lot into a one-page resume that you shared with me, which is very impressive.
Yeah, sorry to be so thorough.
I appreciate it. So can you just take a few minutes and tell us what led you to get to this current position and why you wanted to be here?
Sure. So what's interesting about my life is that when I studied broadcast journalism at Temple University, I never thought in a million years that I would end up back in my home community. But my first job brought me right back to York. And one of the first things I did was buy a home in the city of York. So I have become fully invested in our community, and I've lived in downtown York ever since. When I was working in television, I decided that I wanted to get active and involved in our community. And one of the first things I did was get active politically. That turned into a career working for Todd Platts, who's now one of the judges here in the Judicial Center. And that really was a springboard to where I am now. After working for Todd in Congress, I decided that I wanted to bring all of that work back to the local community. And that's when I found my career at the Community Foundation. And during those 14 years working with the Community Foundation, I realized how important that relationship was that I was building with estate planning professionals here in York County, working with estate attorneys and accountants and financial advisors, people who were influencing people's decision-making for their futures and for their families. And because I built a really good friendship with Brad Jacobs, my predecessor, Register of Wills, always kept in touch with Brad. And when I realized that Brad was considering retiring, I thought, man, this really was an elected position that was built for me. I took all of those years of experience working with estate planning professionals, and I thought, those are the people who work so closely with the Register of Wills and Clerk of Orphans Court. I could do that job. And I'll tell you, when I was elected and started working in this position, I really felt like, this position was made for me and I was made for it. So that's really how it all came to be. And I feel that this is just one more level, one more layer of my service to our community. So I really appreciate getting to serve folks here in York County.
Outstanding. Well, I know that you're doing a terrific job in that role. Many of us at CGA deal with you and your staff, and you're professional, you're skilled, and you're certainly important in many respects. I already invited you to appear on the show again, and we're going to talk about a different topic, but today I want to focus briefly on your role as clerk of the Orphans Court. Can
Sure.
you tell those who are watching us what you do in that role as clerk of the Orphans Court?
Sure. So, as you had already mentioned, I have two roles. The Register of Wills role is pretty simple. We're responsible for the administration of estates and we act as an agent for the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue to collect Pennsylvania inheritance taxes. The Clerk of Orphans Court side is a little bit more complex. So, the Orphans Court, overseeing the Orphans Court, we're in charge of its proceedings, including dockets and filings for petitions of incapacitated persons, for the appointment of guardians, for the termination of parental rights, as well as adoptions, and then also the legislature tacked on the issuing of marriage licenses. And I will tell you that the issuing of marriage licenses keeps us very busy. We have folks far and wide, not just York-Countyans, but people from all over Pennsylvania who choose to work through our office to get their marriage license. So that really keeps us busy. But I will say we take very seriously our role of being the filing office for all of those things I mentioned, for the petitions, for incapacitated persons, for guardianships, and the oversight of adoptions.
So excellent. So you're involved with helping families from start to finish, if you will.
That's right, in many different ways. And I will tell you that this professional staff in my office takes very seriously its role. Folks come to our office for some wonderful things, certainly to get a marriage license, but for a lot of not so good things, whether it's opening an estate for somebody who's passed away, for someone they care about, or because they are involved in a family situation where for some reason someone is losing their rights as a parent, or because somebody's capacity has diminished and they are applying to become their guardian. But then again, wonderful situations like adoptions. So it's great to be in court when celebrating a new family and how that family has grown in a new way. So we're very fortunate to get to play that role for people here in our community who need us at that time.
Excellent. So before we focus on guardianships, I just have to relate a personal story, Bryan. When I applied for my marriage license some 25 years ago in your office, which was handled by a predecessor in the administrative offices of the county in the lower level, I still recall leaving and there was a sign on the wall that said, "Everybody brings joy to this office. Someone they enter and someone they leave." And it's probably one of the top 10 quotes that I've considered throughout my life. I've varied it to all sorts of circumstances, but I think it highlights how moments can be made better by change. But I still recall seeing that as I was leaving, and I hope that I brought some joy when I came, and perhaps I brought some joy when I left. But
well, we still have that. We still have that sign here in the office. It's not out in the public area, but we do have it behind the scenes, and we look at it and reflect on it every day. We're fortunate to have some mementos from when Mr. Walters was the registering clerk, and from when Brad Jacobs was the registering clerk. So they still are alive and well here in our office.
Outstanding. Well, that is one takeaway. So if we focus a moment on guardianships,
Sure.
You talked about somebody incapacitated needing a guardian. Let's zero in those circumstances. So somebody lacks capacity. It would be testamentary capacity to make decisions for himself or herself. And in that juncture, in the absence of documentation, they have to file with you. And then what happens next?
Well, first of all, there are two types of guardianship. There's guardianship of the body and guardianship of the estate. So either guardianship of someone's health and well-being or of their financial needs. And so that's important to remember, because somebody could petition to be a guardian for either of those reasons, or in some cases for both of those reasons. So when someone files a petition for the appointment of guardianship in our office. They typically do that with the assistance of professional legal counsel, and I would recommend that. I think these processes are very they're very specific. They require specific attention, and while someone can represent themselves, I always think it's best to have an expert in your corner, someone who understands the legal process, someone who understands court proceedings, someone who knows what the judge is looking for when the judge asks questions. So that's a little bit of a commercial, not for any particular attorney, but to best represent yourself when you're being involved in this process. So the first thing that will happen when you approach my office, my staff is going to ask, why are you seeking guardianship? What are the circumstances? They're not doing that to be nosy or to get in your business. They're doing that because first they want to make sure that you're petitioning for the right thing. In some cases, someone might mistakenly come to the Orphans Court to pursue guardianship when in fact what they're looking for is custody. So oftentimes there's confusion that folks have between custody and guardianship. And just by asking some simple questions at the beginning, my staff can help someone determine which is the avenue they're seeking. Custody is typically between parents, and oftentimes it's part of a divorce settlement. But in this case, when folks are coming to the clerk of the Orphans Court, they're looking for guardianship. It's to oversee either the financial aspects of somebody's life, someone who's important to them, or their health and well-being. So that's the first step. There are two different types of guardianship. As you mentioned, first for incapacitated persons, the other for minors. There are situations where folks need to seek guardianship for minors, and we'll talk about that later. But for incapacitated persons, it's very simple. Somebody's not able to take care of themselves anymore. They don't have the capacity. Their mental state might be such that they aren't making the right decisions for themselves. And, oftentimes family members step up to play that role. If not, perhaps something's occurred where an institution might be, I shouldn't say institution, a professional is stepping into that type of a capacity. So at least our office starts the process, works with folks to complete the 9-page questionnaire. Again, typically completed by the attorney that someone has hired. It will ask questions about the individual who's applying, who's petitioning for guardianship. It will ask questions about the person who is to be deemed incapacitated. And it's really how the judge and the court starts its decision-making process.
Thank you. So you said a few things that I'd like to zero in on. First, maybe just a question. How long does a typical guardianship proceeding take from the point of filing until a decision by a judge?
Every case is different. However, I will say every case does require a hearing. Determining incapacity is not going to simply happen by, some bureaucrat reviewing an application and stamping it approved. So getting on the court calendar, it could take a month, a couple of months. It really depends on how prepared individuals are. And again, that's why I encourage folks to seek legal representation, because that professional will make sure that you are best prepared for the situation.
And technically, in a situation like that, the person stepping forward, you mentioned family members, but it's really whoever thinks they need to step forward to be helpful, because at that moment, the person with who would be the subject of the guardianship may not even be able to make those decisions himself or herself.
That's correct. And they're really difficult proceedings. The incapacitated person has to participate in the hearing so that the judge can make an informed decision. And it can be quite emotional, for folks who are unable to respond, for folks who their mental capacity just is not there. And so it can be a very difficult process for folks to participate in a very emotional situation. Um, and again, it's not just for folks who have physical difficulties. It's also for folks who might not be able to make the best decisions for their financial situations, like I mentioned. In our world, folks are most familiar with the Britney Spears situation. We saw news about that all the time, and where her father was, I guess, what in California they called her conservator for years. That really is, in Pennsylvania, that is a form of guardianship. And so situations like that occur here in our own community, where adult persons just are not able to oversee their own financial needs, their own estate, and someone participates to help them ensure that their legal and fiduciary decisions are made in the best way for them. So guardianship is a natural part of everyday life, whether it's for that person's health and well-being, or whether it's for their financial interests.
Well, Bryan, you certainly presented guardianship as a solution to a problem when somebody's in need, and I appreciate that part. As you know, we have attorneys in our office that are involved in those proceedings. We're also involved in other mechanisms to address issues, and that specifically involves planning, and more specifically involves two key documents: a power of attorney and then a healthcare power of attorney that's often combined with a living will. And as you know, both of those documents allow an individual to name somebody else to act for them should the need arise. And the benefits in that, I think, were highlighted by what you discussed a few minutes ago. One, if you make a decision in those documents, you're picking your guardian, you're picking the person that's going to look out for you, if you will, which technically I should have said guardian in that case. You're picking your agent, but you pick the person. You avoid the need to do the 9-page questionnaire, which sounds like a lot of fun. You avoid hiring an attorney for that purpose to go to court. You avoid the time. So one of the big takeaways from the show today is highlighted here, which is if you do some planning on the front end, it can make things easier for others to help you later.
Yeah, absolutely. None of us thinks something is ever going to happen to us. We think we're prepared. Excuse me. We don't think a tragedy is going to occur. We certainly hope and pray that one doesn't occur. But being prepared is probably the best advice I could give anybody. If you could think ahead, if you could look, go ahead 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you're in a situation where your family members have to go to court to determine who's going to take care of you because you haven't done that pre-planning yourself, or you haven't done that pre-planning for your family, for your minor children. It's really hard to think about those situations. But if we all just took a step back, realized that anything could happen in our lives, and how much simpler we could make things for ourselves or for our children in the future if we would put some effort into working with a professional, having those documents in place, choosing who we want to take care of us, or choosing who we want to take care of our children if we're not available to do that. It's just really important to be prepared, and having those conversations is difficult. If we can have them openly with folks, if we can share some examples of some horror stories, not to scare people, but to make them realize, to inspire them to be proactive. I think that's so important. And so when folks like you or I are in forums where we can give people the opportunity to understand the value of being prepared, then we're really doing our job.
Well, one of the quotes that I talk about a lot with my planning is that planning is bringing the future into the present so you can do something about it now. And I think you're exactly right. We've both been around long enough to have seen tragedy strike friends and family. And while it may not happen, it can. And one of the things you don't want to do is leave uncertainty to arise in those instances when things are hard anyway. Now, we talked briefly, and I just want to circle back to minor children.
Yes.
I talked about powers of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney, which are documents that can be done by legal adults. So in Pennsylvania, ages 18 and older. But if you're a parent with children who are under 18, then you need to figure out who could help look after those children if you're unable. And that does become the appointment of a guardian. And that's done in the document that you see time and time again, which is a last will and testament.
Right.
And in those wills, typically you see a guardian of the person, to which you alluded earlier, which is who would oversee things for a child on a day-to-day basis, who signs permission slips at school, who goes to the doctor's office.
Right.
And then there's also a guardian of the estate, which then takes care of assets that would go to that person. So I think I heard you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think everyone is well-intentioned. And I think when there is need, family members or friends step up to help. But really, without those legal documents, you could get yourself into some trouble. So you really do need to be prepared and have those legal documents in place. The last thing you would want is to be well-intentioned and then to get in trouble for doing something that you really don't have the legal authority to do.
It's interesting, Bryan. A lot of my estate planning clients struggle to complete wills because they analyze almost excessively who to appoint as a guardian. And that's a hard thing to do because you're envisioning your child's life without you in it and who can take care of them. And considerations come into play like, where would my child live? What is the capacity of the person to help with another child if I name them as a guardian? But I would say that making that decision does offer relief. And I would also say that while we're talking about these documents, they're not onerous documents to complete.
Right.
And a power of attorney is a few pages. Naming a guardian in a will is usually less than a page. And they can be changed too. And I would just say that for anybody that's considering the issue, if you name guardians today in your will for your child and you revisit that in a few years and say, listen, I named my parents, but at this point, I don't think they're as well suited, it's not hard to make that change.
Jeff, if we think about our wills like we think about ourselves, we're living, breathing individuals. If you consider your will to be a living document, there can be many iterations. So I would suggest that folks should simply get it done. And then as your situation changes, you can update that document as often as you need to. But in particular, it's so important to name who you want to be in charge of your estate when you die. List how you want your assets to be divided. If you have minor children, name who you want to take care of them. And then tell the person who will be in charge, first, where they can find your original will. Talk to those people who you want to be guardians and take care of your children and let them know your wishes. It's so important to have conversation. It's not just a paper document. It then might inspire you to go through the process of talking to all the people around you to make sure they know what role they're going to play. The document will, perhaps create a trust for your assets, who will then support your minor children. So these tools were created so that we all can live a fruitful life without worry that what's going to happen when we're not here. They're so valuable.
Bryan, I truly appreciate your perspective, and your experience is one of the reasons why I invited you to be in one of these first shows. You've been around these issues in so many different ways. You recognize the needs, you care about people. My plan is for these shows to go on and talk about related topics, and we'll have you back on to talk more about wills, to talk more about probate. But the goal here is to create information so people understand the key decisions they need to make, understand what can happen if they don't make those decisions, and get them on that path. And I really like the idea of you calling a last will and testament a living, breathing document. I think would I consider that to be a paradox or a juxtaposition, but I think it's it's very accurate. You need to look at it. You need to let it evolve with you, make those decisions. It need not be cumbersome. And I think you highlighted when you talked about those guardianship proceedings, and I know that your staff makes it as easy as they can, but you're still looking at getting an attorney, you're still looking at a 9-page document, you're still looking at getting a hearing in front of a judge. And while that can be done, and I know your office helps do it, ideally you want to avoid those proceedings, make decisions that you want to make for yourself and your loved ones. Plan now, avoid the pain later, and protect yourself and your loved ones.
And I think don't worry about making mistakes. If you are in that process and you are planning ahead and you are interested about creating these vehicles for the future, again, things are going to change. Or perhaps the professional you're working with didn't serve you the way you expected. You can change attorneys. You can create new documents. Again, like you reiterated, living, breathing documents. We're all growing and evolving. So just get it done and then make changes as you need to, as your life changes. It's just really important to have all these things in place.
Good point, Bryan. And there are lots of skilled practitioners in our area that can help with the documents. Ideally, you want to be with somebody that can help you implement and somebody that can be available if you need to change or if you need to talk, so you can allow things to evolve as need be and protect yourself and your loved ones.
Absolutely.
Bryan, I think we've hit this topic very well today, and I'm thrilled with the information you provided. Thank you so much again for joining us, talking about guardianships, highlighting the benefits of planning, highlighting living, breathing documents. And thank you as well for your service to our community. I know you're a well-respected leader. That's why I reached out to you, and I'm thrilled that you could join me today. So thank you very much. And to those who are watching who will watch this, we're going to do more sessions. We're going to provide more information. So please come back again, learn what you need to know to protect yourself and your family.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Bryan.